The handcuffs clicked shut on my wrists in full view of rush-hour traffic. I had my federal prosecutor badge in my left hand, my credentials folder open on the passenger seat, and 9 years of service to the United States Department of Justice behind me. None of it meant a thing to Officer Dale Pruitt of the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department, who had just told me, with the flat calm of a man doing something perfectly routine, that my SUV had come back stolen. I stood on the shoulder of Route 9 in a blazer and heels, my badge catching the morning light while 3 cars slowed to stare. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. 14 months later, a jury would sit in deliberation for 4 hours and come back with a number, $720,000. And every single person in that courtroom would turn to look at him. But we'll get to that. First, let me tell you how it started. My name is Camille Dorsey, and I had been a federal prosecutor for 9 years when it happened. 9 years of grand jury filings, pretrial motions, and the particular satisfaction of watching a white-collar criminal read his conviction aloud because the federal judge required it. Required him to say the words, out loud, in front of the people he had defrauded, so that there was no ambiguity about what had occurred. I prosecuted financial crimes out of the district office, wire fraud, money laundering, securities manipulation, the kind of cases that don't make the evening news but dismantle serious criminal infrastructure, one indictment at a time. I was good at my job. I had won 22 of my last 24 trials, and the 2 I'd lost still bothered me, which my colleague Marcus said was either a sign of professionalism or a personality disorder, and he wasn't sure which. I drove a charcoal gray Lincoln Navigator, 2 years old, purchased outright with my own money after a year in which I had taken exactly 4 days off. I had wanted that car for a long time, longer than made any practical sense, and buying it felt like a quiet, private acknowledgement that I had arrived somewhere worth acknowledging. I loved the way it sat on the road. I loved the way the engine sounded. I wore my badge on a lanyard every single day, even in the car, even on weekends the way some people keep a spare key in their wallet, not because they expect to need it, but because it costs nothing to be prepared. My life was ordered and purposeful, and, if I am honest, slightly too solitary. I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Caldwell, close enough to the office to walk when the weather permitted. My closest friend was my colleague Marcus Webb, who prosecuted narcotics cases out of the same office and had the kind of blunt honesty that either makes you a better person or makes you defensive, and he had mostly made me better. We ate lunch together on Tuesdays. My mother called every Sunday from Birmingham. My dry cleaner knew my coffee order because I always stopped there on the way to the office, and we talked about her daughter's college applications. That was my life. I was not unhappy in it. The morning it happened was an ordinary Wednesday in March. I had a case review at 9 and a grand jury session at 11. I left my apartment at 7, coffee in the cup holder, the morning news on low, my badge lanyard around my neck. Traffic on Route 9 was moving. I was running through my opening for the grand jury presentation in my head, the sequence of transactions, the accounts, the dates, when I noticed the patrol cruiser sitting on the shoulder about half a mile ahead. I remember thinking nothing of it. I was doing 63 in a 65. I had done absolutely nothing. The lights came on as I passed. The sirens followed 1 second later. I pulled over with that automatic, muscle memory compliance that had been trained into me long before I understood why, a reflex that I had examined many times since, and that I will not pretend was uncomplicated. I stopped the car. I lowered the window. I placed my badge on the dashboard where it was visible. I put both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way you are supposed to. The way that is meant to communicate exactly one thing. I am not a threat. Officer Pruitt approached from the passenger side. I noticed that immediately. Most officers come to the driver's window. He stopped and looked at the car. the way a person looks at an object they are trying to identify, his gaze moving slowly from the front bumper to the rear, then back to me. Then he came around. "License and registration," he said. No greeting, no explanation for the stop, just the order, delivered through the window before he had even fully stopped walking. "Of course," I said. I handed him both, and then I held up the badge. "I'm a federal prosecutor. That's my badge, and that's my credentials folder open on the seat. Is there a problem with my license?" He looked at the badge. He looked at my face. He looked back at the badge. There was something in his expression that I found difficult to name in the moment, but that I would describe precisely in a courtroom 11 months later. It was the expression of a man who has already decided the situation means something other than what the evidence in front of him suggests. "I need you to step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "I've given you my license and registration," I said, keeping my voice level. "I've identified myself as a federal law enforcement officer. Can you tell me why you're asking me to step out?" "The plate came back with a flag," he said. "Step out of the vehicle." Something cold moved through my chest. Not fear. Or not exactly fear. More like the specific sensation of standing at the edge of something and looking down, knowing the ground beneath your feet has already begun to give. I opened the door. I stepped out onto the gravel shoulder in my heels and my blazer with my badge still in my hand, because I was not going to put it down. I was not going to give him the version of this moment in which I did not have my badge in my hand. That was when I saw the second officer. He had come up behind the navigator without making a sound, and he was standing at the rear bumper with his thumbs hooked in his belt, and an expression of careful neutrality that I recognized as the expression of a man who is waiting to see how things develop before he decides which version of events he is going to support. I noted his badge number. I noted the body camera on Officer Pruitt's chest, the small red light that told me it was recording. I noted the time on my phone, 7:22 in the morning. "This vehicle is reported stolen," Pruitt said. "I need you to put your hands behind your back." "That is not possible," I said. My voice was steady. I had spent 9 years controlling my voice in federal courtrooms, and I was controlling it now with everything I had. "I purchased this vehicle at the Lincoln dealership in Crossfield 18 months ago. I have the title, the insurance card, and the registration, which I have already given you. The vehicle is not stolen. I am its registered owner. Ma'am, hands behind your back." I thought, in the 3 seconds between his words and my response, about a conversation I had with Marcus 6 months earlier. We had been in the break room, and I had been reading about a stop-and-frisk case in the news, and I had said, "I remember this precisely. At least if something like that ever happened to me, the badge would end it immediately." Marcus had looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup with an expression I had not been able to read at the time. He had not said anything. He had just looked at me, and then looked away, and changed the subject. I understood that expression now, standing on the shoulder of Route 9 with my hands behind my back. The cuffs were cold. They were too tight. He applied them with the mechanical efficiency of a man performing a task he had performed 1,000 times and felt nothing in particular about, and the badge I had been holding fell into the gravel at my feet because I could no longer hold it. I stood on the shoulder of that highway for 51 minutes. I watched Officer Pruitt sit in his cruiser while he ran the plates. I watched the second officer, whose name, I would learn later, was Sergeant Kevin Marsh, lean against the back of the navigator with his arms folded, occasionally glancing at me the way a person glances at luggage while waiting at a carousel. 4 cars slowed as they passed. One driver took out his phone. I remember thinking, very clearly and very calmly, "Good. I want you to take a photograph. I want there to be evidence that this happened exactly this way." Around the 30-minute mark, something shifted inside me. The cold sensation in my chest stopped being shock and became something else entirely. something quieter and more dangerous. I stood on that gravel shoulder in handcuffs and I took inventory. The time, the badge numbers, the body camera, the bystander with the phone, the precise words each officer had used. I filed everything, the way I filed evidence before a trial, carefully and in order, because I already knew, standing there on that highway, hands behind my back, badge in the gravel, that this was not ending here. This was only beginning. When Pruitt finally got out of the cruiser, he walked toward me with a recalibrated expression, not apologetic, not concerned. The expression of a man who has lost the argument but has not yet decided how to frame the loss. "There was a database error," he said. "The plate was incorrectly flagged. You're free to go." He reached for my wrists as if removing the cuffs were the natural, unremarkable conclusion of a routine encounter. "I need your full name, badge number, and your supervisor's direct line," I said. He paused. For a fraction of a second, something moved across his face. Not guilt, exactly, but a flicker of recalibration, the recognition that this situation was not going to end the way he had assumed. There was a clerical "badge number," I said. Quiet. Absolute. Like a door that has been locked from the inside and will not be opened by anything less than the right key. He gave it to me. He had no legal choice. I entered every digit into my phone with hands that were shaking, the only visible sign of what was happening inside me. Then I walked back to the navigator, sat down, placed my palms flat on the warm leather of the steering wheel, and did not move for 4 full minutes. The engine idled. Traffic hummed 60 feet away. My badge was still in the gravel outside. I made myself get back out and pick it up. I cleaned the dust off the metal with the edge of my blazer. Then I put it back around my neck where it belonged, and I drove to the office. I had a grand jury presentation in 4 hours. I went through every page of it. I drank my coffee. I said good morning to Marcus in the corridor, and he said I looked like I hadn't slept, and I said I was fine. I was not fine. But I was already thinking about what I needed to do, and thinking clearly was more useful to me than anything else I could have been doing. I had spent 9 years building cases from evidence. I knew exactly what kind of evidence I had, and I knew exactly what to do with it. But that story, the part where I stopped being the person that happened to, was still 12 hours away. Here is part 2. The conclusion. Marcus found me at my desk at 6:15 that evening. Everyone else had gone home. He knocked on the open door, looked at me for a moment, then walked in and sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited, the way he always did when something was serious. "Tell me," he said. So I told him. All of it. I told him about the lights in the rearview mirror, the approach from the wrong side, the badge I held up, the cuffs, the 51 minutes on the gravel, the database error that was nobody's fault and everybody's problem. I told it the way I would have told it to a jury. In sequence, with specific details, without editorializing. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When I finished, the office was very quiet. Outside the window, the city had gone blue with evening. "How tight were the cuffs?" he said. I showed him my wrists. There were marks still visible, faint red indentations running in parallel lines just above the bone. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he said, "You're filing a complaint tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." "I know," I said. "And you're calling Janet Okafor." Janet Okafor was a civil rights attorney in the city, one of the best in the state, known for cases exactly like this one. I had thought of her name approximately 40 minutes after I sat down at my desk that morning, and had not stopped thinking about it since. "I already left her a voicemail," I said. Marcus looked at me with the expression of a man who is trying to decide whether to say the thing he actually wants to say. He settled for putting both hands flat on my desk, pushing himself up and saying, "Good. Don't let them bury the body camera footage. I hadn't thought about that. I was thinking about it now." I spent the next 2 hours in the office filing the formal internal affairs complaint with the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department, documenting every detail while the memory was still precise. Times, badge numbers, exact wording of every exchange. I requested the body camera footage in writing, certified email, time-stamped, delivered to 3 separate department addresses so that no one could later claim they hadn't received it. I had prosecuted enough obstruction cases to know that evidence has a way of becoming unavailable when it is inconvenient for the people who hold it, and I was not going to give anyone that window. Janet called back at 8:47. "I've been waiting for a case like this," she said, after I had talked for 12 uninterrupted minutes. Not because I wanted it to happen to anyone, but because when it does happen to a federal prosecutor with a badge in her hand and a body camera recording the whole thing, it is very difficult for them to say it wasn't what it was. "They'll say it was a database error," I said. "Of course they will. And you'll say, then show me the database. Show me when the error was entered. Show me who entered it. And show me the protocol that required the officer to handcuff a credentialed federal law enforcement officer, rather than simply verify her identity and send her on her way." A pause. "Can you come in Thursday morning?" I could come in Thursday morning. What I had not anticipated was what happened between Monday evening and Thursday morning. Tuesday, I received a call from Captain Harold Boone of the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department. He was calling, he said, as a courtesy, to let me know that the department was reviewing the incident and took these matters very seriously. He had a carefully modulated voice, the voice of an administrator who had been trained to de-escalate. He used the phrase, "regrettable misunderstanding," twice in the first 90 seconds, and something about the repetition of it, the way he landed on those words with the faint emphasis of a man who has decided they are the correct words, put me on alert. "I appreciate the call, Captain," I said. "I've documented the incident and filed a formal complaint. My attorney will be in touch with your department regarding discovery." Silence. A slightly different quality of silence than the pause between ordinary sentences. "You've retained an attorney," he said. It was not quite a question. "I have. Ms. Dorsey, I want to assure you that this department—" "I look forward to the formal response through proper channels," I said. "Thank you for calling, Captain." I hung up and made a note of the time, the date, and the exact wording of the conversation. Then I called Janet and read it to her word for word. "Regrettable misunderstanding," she repeated slowly, as if tasting it. "Good. That's their position on record. We'll use that." On Wednesday afternoon, I learned about the second flag. Janet called me while I was in a deposition, and I stepped out into the corridor to take it. She told me, in the precise and unhurried voice she used when delivering information she knew would land hard, that her investigator had pulled the dispatch records from the morning of the stop. Officer Pruitt had not simply run my plate through the standard database. He had called in the stop verbally to dispatch before he had run anything, before he had any grounds to believe the vehicle was flagged, and the recording of that call showed him describing, unprompted, a black female driver in a high-end Navigator, behavior consistent with stolen vehicle. I stood in the corridor outside the deposition room and felt the floor tilt very slightly beneath me. Not shock. I had stopped being shocked sometime around Tuesday morning. What I felt was something colder and more clarifying. The database error had not caused the stop. The stop had preceded the database query by 4 minutes. He had called it in based on what he saw, and then found the flag to justify it afterward. "That's the case," Janet said. "That's the whole case right there." My throat was tight. I swallowed against it. "What does the dispatch recording show exactly?" Black female. Luxury vehicle. Probably doesn't belong in it. Not a direct quote, but close enough that it's going to play very poorly to a jury. I went back into the deposition. I conducted it professionally and completely. I did not let my voice change. But inside I had moved into a very particular state. The state I entered before a major trial, when the noise of uncertainty goes quiet, and what's left is just the work. I knew the evidence. I knew the argument. I knew exactly where this was going. That night I did not sleep. I made coffee at 2 in the morning and sat at my kitchen table with the case file Janet had sent over. Dispatch records, body camera transcript, Pruitt's prior complaint history, which contained 2 previous civilian complaints that had both been marked unfounded by Internal Affairs within 60 days of filing. I read everything twice. The apartment was very still. My badge was on the table beside the coffee cup. I kept looking at it, not with sentiment exactly, but with the specific attention you give an object that has become evidence. I thought about the morning of the stop, about holding the badge up and watching him look at it, and decide it meant nothing. I thought about the 51 minutes on the shoulder. I thought about Sergeant Marsh leaning against the back of my car, waiting to see which way it went. I thought about the bystander with the phone, whose footage Janet's investigator had already located and preserved. I thought about Captain Boone saying, "regrettable misunderstanding," in that carefully calibrated tone. I thought about all the people before me, without my credentials, without my training, without my ability to document and litigate, for whom this kind of stop had ended differently. I thought about that for a long time. At 4:30 in the morning, I closed the file, washed my coffee cup, and went to stand in front of the bathroom mirror for a moment. I looked tired. I looked precise. I looked like a person who had decided something and was not going to undecide it. That was enough. The lawsuit was filed 11 days after the stop. Hargrove County's legal team responded with the expected strategy. The stop was procedurally justified. The database flag was a documented system error. The officer had followed standard protocol, and any distress experienced by the plaintiff was unfortunate, but not actionable. They submitted an affidavit from Pruitt stating he had stopped the vehicle solely due to the flagged plate and had acted professionally throughout. The affidavit did not mention the 4-minute gap between the stop and the database query. It did not mention the dispatch recording. Janet filed a motion for discovery of all dispatch recordings from the date in question. The department objected. The judge granted our motion anyway. The deposition of Officer Pruitt took place on a Thursday morning in October, 7 months after the stop. I was not in the room. Janet had advised against it, and she was right. But she sent me the transcript that evening, and I read it at my kitchen table with a glass of water and the specific focused tension of someone defusing something. The dispatch recording had been played for him. He had been asked under oath to explain the 4-minute gap. He said he didn't recall the exact sequence of events. He said he may have called it in simultaneously with running the plates. He said the recording might be time-stamped incorrectly. Janet in the transcript had then asked him to read aloud his own words from the recording. The description of a black female driver in a high-end vehicle, and asked him to explain what specifically had prompted that description before he had any data about the vehicle at all. The transcript showed a pause of 11 seconds before his answer. I read that pause 3 times. The trial lasted 4 days. I testified on the 2nd day. I wore the same blazer I had been wearing the morning of the stop. Not for drama, but because Janet had suggested it, and she was right about these things. I took the stand and I told the jury exactly what had happened, in the same sequence, with the same precision I had used when I told Marcus that first evening. I showed them the photographs of the marks on my wrists, taken at the medical office Janet had sent me to within hours of the stop. I told them about holding the badge in my hand and watching Officer Pruitt decide it was not relevant to what he had already decided to do. On the third day, the dispatch recording was played in open court. The jury heard Officer Pruitt's voice describing a black female driver in a luxury vehicle before any database query had been run. One juror, I noticed because she was directly in my line of sight, closed her eyes while the recording played, then opened them and wrote something in her notepad. I did not look at Pruitt. I had made the decision, before the trial began, that I was not going to give him the satisfaction of my attention. The county's attorney made the argument, in closing, that errors occur in systems and in judgment, that Officer Pruitt had been on the job for 11 years without a sustained complaint, and that the damages claimed were disproportionate to the incident. Janet stood up and said, in a voice that was absolutely level, the plaintiff held up a federal badge. The officer put her in handcuffs. You heard the recording? You heard his deposition. The only question before you is what we decide that kind of judgment is worth. The jury was out for 4 hours and 12 minutes. I was in the courthouse corridor when the verdict came back. I was standing near the window, drinking bad vending machine coffee, talking to Janet about nothing in particular. A way of filling time that I have always been better at than most people, the product of years spent waiting outside courtrooms. Marcus had taken the day off work to be there and was sitting on a bench 10 feet away, pretending to read something on his phone. When the bailiff opened the door, I put the coffee cup down on the windowsill. I did not finish it. The foreperson read the verdict in a steady voice. Liability, found. Damages, $720,000. The county's attorney, seated across the aisle, wrote something on his legal pad and did not look up. Officer Pruitt sat very still. I watched him the way I watched defendants when verdicts were read, clinically cataloging the exact form that the information took in their body. He went slightly pale. He did not move his hands. Marcus reached over and put his hand on my arm, briefly, and then took it away. Janet touched my shoulder. I sat with the number for a moment, let it settle into the space where the 51 minutes on the shoulder had been sitting for almost a year, and then I breathed out slowly. Congratulations, Janet said quietly. Thank you, I said, for everything. She shook her head. You built this case. I just carried it. The county filed notice of appeal within 30 days. The appeal was denied 8 months later. Officer Pruitt was suspended without pay, pending a departmental review. 3 months after the trial, he resigned. The Hargrove County Sheriff's Department announced a revision of its stop protocols and mandatory bias training for all officers. Changes that Captain Boone described in a press statement as part of the department's ongoing commitment to fair and professional policing. He did not use the phrase regrettable misunderstanding in that statement. I noticed. I heard from the bystander who had taken the video through Janet's investigator. He was a 40-year-old high school teacher named Robert, and he sent a brief message saying he was glad the footage had been useful and that he hoped I was okay. I wrote back and told him it had made a difference, because it had. Evidence always makes a difference. That is the thing I have built my entire career on. I went back to work. I continued prosecuting financial crimes. I won 4 more cases in the 18 months that followed, and lost one, which still bothers me, which Marcus still says is a personality disorder. Some things do not change, and I am not sure they should. My mother called me the Sunday after the verdict. She had been following the case, and had not said much about it during the trial, which was her way. She saves her words until she knows what she needs to say. "Are you done?" she asked. "Is it finished?" "It's finished," I said. A pause. Then, "Good. Now put it down." It took me a while to understand what she meant. Not to forget it. She was not asking me to forget it. She meant something more precise than that. She meant, carry it forward as knowledge, not as weight. Know what happened, know what it cost, know what you did about it, and then put the heaviness of it down, because you will need your hands free. On a Tuesday morning in January, 16 months after the stop, I drove the Navigator to work on Route 9. I passed the exact stretch of shoulder where it had happened. The gravel was the same. The trees were bare. The highway looked the way highways always look in winter, wide and pale and indifferent to everything that has ever occurred beside it. I did not slow down. I did not look away. I held the wheel at 10 and 2, my badge on its lanyard, and I drove past it without giving it anything more than it deserved. A moment of recognition, a breath, and then the road ahead. The coffee in the cup holder was still warm. I took a sip. It tasted, for the first time in a long time, like nothing other than coffee. That was enough. That was exactly enough.